In our time together today, we're going to pick up where we left off when we were together on Tuesday and then start into our first major discussion. But before we did that, I wanted to pause, see if you folks had any questions about anything, anything that would be helpful for us to discuss here at the outset or things of that sort.
It was in the reading for chapter 1 that mentioned downloading the annual reports for TBI. The professor can lead you in the right direction for that.
If such a thing existed, I would point you to that. There are some resources that are referred to in the first chapter of your book that never actually got created. And so there is nothing of that sort for you to look over. A lot of the things that are mentioned in the first chapter of the book related to global bike and such is consistent with your lab work, although the lab work was actually developed well after the book was written. But you should see that that all of that does make sense. But the annual report was never anything that was created. Other questions? All right, well, I did want to round out the kind of introductory discussion that we started last time and then make it so that we can start into the first major topic. And so really the things that I had left to share with you in this course overview discussion had a lot to do with our lab work. And so while I always hope that you listen, please listen extra carefully for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to share I think has the potential to save you a lot of time this semester. One of the things that I will say as we go along, but let me go ahead and start with this, is I am more than happy to assist you in troubleshooting problems that you might run into with your lab work. I don't mind that at all. If you contact me with a problem, what will expedite the process is if you are sure to include screenshots and very thorough explanations of what the problem is so that I can understand the situation. The challenge with that is you might email me at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and it's likely that you would not hear from me in response until 12 hours later when I get around to responding to that email. I will respond to you as quick as possible. Sometimes I have to do some work to figure out the answer to the question, but sometimes you might catch me where I'm on email and I email you back in 5 minutes, but that certainly won't always be the case. So if you can solve your own problem, you will not be in a holding pattern waiting to get things resolved. The nature of your lab work is such, and I didn't used to point this out to students. I thought it might be assumed, but I probably should be explicit about it. All of the exercises that you're doing for your lab work build on one another. And so if you get stuck in lab whatever 5 and can't get that done, don't say, well, I'll just skip over that and go on to 6, 7, 8, and 9. That's not going to work for you. And in fact, even if it looks like it's working, you may be just creating a really big problem for yourself. So when you run into a problem, you are going to have to solve that problem before you can forge ahead. The great thing about problems is you will not get error messages like error 17, and that's the extent of it. You will get very, very thorough messages from the system. So my first comment to you is read and think about the message you are getting. And I cannot tell you, sometimes to me it's kind of humorous where the student will email me and say, oh, by the way, sometimes the message will tell you how to fix the problem. And I literally have had situations where the student got an error message that they sent me a screenshot of, that the error message said, cannot do this, run transaction, blah, 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 to solve the problem. and the student emails me and asks me what should I do, and I say, well, you should run transaction blah, blah, blah to solve the problem. Exactly what the message they got from the system said, and they email me back and say, great, that worked, okay? You are going to see a lot of messages from the system this semester, and you want to get in the habit of not just saying, oh, I got an error, but actually looking at what that says. And as you build up experience with the system, you should be able to actually understand what it is telling you. Now, the first thing to note is the icons have changed in the most recent version of the SAP GUI. You know, I've got three icons at the on the slide here that are in, I guess those would be called primary colors. The SAP GUI has moved to more muted tones, so you won't necessarily see those same colors anymore. But there are three different ways the system will pass messages to you. One of those is what's simply called an information message. And the information message is usually denoted with the letter I, usually in lowercase. The old color used to be blue. It still is kind of bluish. And it used to be in a circle, and now I think sometimes it's in a square. Okay? But an information message is usually just the system passing on information to you for your benefit. It is not indicative of there being anything wrong. For example, if you put in a sales order and you select a delivery date in the future, when you save it, a message will pop up that says something to the effect of delivery date was evaluated. And just, it's the system telling you, we checked to make sure the delivery date was good. And so there you know, the system checked. All you have to do is hit the enter key on your keyboard or hit the green check mark in the box that pops up and continue on. That is not a sign of a problem. An informational message is literally just that. Messages for your information. You will see those a lot. Now, there are, in fact, two different ways that you can see messages come from the system. If this is a obviously highly sophisticated drawing of the SAP GUI window on your computer, messages will show up either down here in the bottom left corner in the, I think this is called the status bar, or sometimes you'll have a dialog box appear. The dialog boxes are more formally called modal dialog boxes, which means you're going to have to dismiss this dialog box before you can keep going. Sometimes things that appear here in the status window, you can just glance at them and keep on going, and you don't have to dismiss it like you would up here. But the I corresponds with just a message. That is stuff for your information. The one that tends to trip students up the most is the yellow exclamation mark. And I think that although it's shown there in a circle, sometimes you'll see that actually in different shapes. But that's called a warning. Now, what you should know about a warning is sometimes warnings are to be expected. And they're not indicative of there being a problem, but they are indicative of the system wanting to tell you something important that it wants to make sure that you knew. So, what do you do when you get a warning? You press the enter key or hit the appropriate check mark either here at the top of the SAP GUI or otherwise, and the warning will just go away and you can keep working. Now, many times you will see in your lab instructions where it says, do this, this, press enter, and then the very next instruction will be press enter. And that's because in the lab, I know you're going to get a warning message. And so that second enter is there just to tell you to dismiss the warning message. So warning messages are yellow. They're to be expected. And for the most part, you should read them and be aware of what they say, but not be extremely concerned about them. Warning messages interject themselves in your workflow, but should not stop you from continuing to work. Red exclamation marks, on the other hand, are a different story. Those are errors. And errors have to be fixed before you will be able to continue your work. And at that point, now it's a matter of figuring out what the error message actually tells you and then responding. So this is my point here. Warning messages, informational messages, they're to be expected. Just read them, press enter to continue. I have one example I can show you from another slide deck I have here. You know, you're putting in a standard order, and that dialog box in the upper right there appears. Change an invoice date. The billing date is redetermined. Okay, you can see in the upper left-hand corner it even says information. So that's the way the dialog boxes will look. They'll either say information, warning, or error. And the message could appear in dialog boxes, or it could show up down here in the lower left region of your screen. But don't let that trip you up. You're going to see a lot of those, okay? My best advice to you is to read the message, whether it's any of these three types, and think about what it is saying. Configuration error messages and warnings are usually really, really helpful. And oftentimes, in the message, it will contain a link to documentation that explains to you how to solve the problem. So what you want to develop skill at this semester is being able to solve these problems on your own. This is how you really know whether you understand what's going on, is you can read a message and say, oh, I remember when I set that up 4 exercises ago, maybe I did something wrong. Let me go back into that exercise and check my work. And then lo and behold, you discover, oh wow, I was supposed to put this value in this field and I didn't. Or I was supposed to put this value in this field and I put the wrong value. Let me fix that. You fix it, you save it, you go back to where you were, and now everything works as it should. So in many cases, if you're thinking as you go along, you're going to see these things and you can solve these problems, and it's just kind of a minor pothole that you run into in your work process. Think about what the text says and think about it in the context of what you've done. Now, you will occasionally see things where in our labs they're broken up into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and so on. You may encounter a situation where you're doing work in phase 3 and the error you made was way back in phase 1. And that's going to be perhaps more challenging to troubleshoot. But due to the nature of the workflow, most of the time when you run into an error caused by something you did wrong, it's not very far in the distant past where you actually made the mistake. So if you think about the error message in the context of, okay, what have I been doing, then that's going to lead you, hopefully, close to the error. The other thing is, let's say the error message says, blah, 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 error with posting key GBB. Well, go back in the exercises and look at where you did stuff with GBB. And this is where the fact that I've given you the lab documents in electronic format means that you can do Control F and scan through the document electronically to find things really works in your favor. So look for like keywords that are in the error messages. Use the find feature to kind of review backwards in the document to see when you were working on that thing, and then go back and check your work. So let's assume you ran into an error. So you're stopped dead in the water. So you're trying to figure out, okay, what should I do here? You read the text, you still don't have any ideas. The text make reference to, let's say, posting key GBB. you go back and look at posting key GBB, you don't see a solution. You're still stuck. What is your next step? And this is exactly the way professionals troubleshoot things, including those that make a lot of money doing this. Google the error message, okay? And I mean Google the precise error message, the exact words that show up in that error message. It's not like there's a human there that's describing the error to you using distinct language every time it occurs. There are a myriad of errors that occur, but every time this particular error occurs, the system always describes it in a particular way. You type that error message into Google, and the vast majority of times, you're going to see maybe a message posted on a forum by someone saying, I'm doing configuration work and I ran into this problem. What does it mean? And if you go to that web page, you're going to see where other people reply and tell them how to fix it. There is, and this was renamed a few years ago, but there is a website out there called the SCN, which is the SAP Community Network. It is free for anyone who wants to join. It is extremely active with SAP professionals. There are places you can go to download product demos, to download software. It has message forums. It has a lot of resources related to SAP, all of which are free. When you Google error messages, it would not at all be unusual for the top hits that come back by Google to be pages on the SCN. It's a great resource. Use that. Google the error message. I am willing to bet that 95% of the time, once you've followed this sequence, you will have been able to solve the problem on your own. And I hope that when you do that, you congratulate yourself for work well done because you followed the process that professionals follow on an ongoing basis for troubleshooting their own work. But whether we're talking student work or professional work, sometimes you just get stuck and you have to consult with a configuration expert. And I will play that role for you this semester. Now, the lab work that you are doing was created by the SAP University Alliances program and fairly heavily edited and supplemented by things that I have done or things that some graduate students did a few semesters ago. I go through every semester the lab work and rework it myself. Now, I'm a little behind this semester. I've only done through phase 4, so I'm about 2 months ahead of you guys at this point. I have gone through the lab work and I play stupid and just do exactly what the lab work tells me to do. I'm through phase 4 and haven't run into any problems. If you follow the instructions exactly, it will work. If you don't, you will have problems. So my thought to you is, if you run into a problem and you're thinking there's something wrong with these instructions, that is not the case, okay? They have been well vetted by students in previous semesters, and I go through them regularly. They work. And so I don't mind answering questions, and I'm happy to help, but don't blame the instructions, okay? If you're going to blame anything, blame your inability to follow the instructions. Now, there are times when it is really, really hard in the instructions to give you an explanation of what you should do without it, just taking up an outrageous amount of text. It'd be kind of cumbersome to say something like, okay, look at the screen and see on the screen in the upper right-hand corner there's a pink box. Click in that pink box. And, if everything were described that precisely, the lab documents would be 5 times longer than they are. So what will happen is your first few phases will be extremely descriptive. But then after that, there's an expectation that you will be able to figure some things out on your own based on accumulated experience. One example of this will be, you're told to, let's say, you're filling out a screen that has multiple fields on it, and one of the fields here is a purchase order field. This is a totally hypothetical example. So you have been creating a purchase order in your work. Now, one way you could fill in that purchase order is maybe 5 screens ago when you created the purchase order, you might make note of the message that appeared here and write down the number that the system gave you for the purchase order. And if you did that, that's great, but that's not what I'm expecting you to do. Every one of these fields, of course, is going to have a little search bubble next to it, or you can press F4 to look up a purchase order in the system. Well, when you do that, as you might recall from your previous experience, you're going to get a search dialog box that appears, and what this dialog box contains very much depends on what you're searching for. It's going to look different if you're searching for a company code or a sales organization than it will when you're looking for a purchase order. In addition to that, there's going to be multiple tabs here at the top that tell you how to search. Now, early in the labs, I will give you instructions that will say something like, search for the purchase order using the Purchase Orders by Company Code tab and supplying your company code. And so you have to pick the appropriate tab here, and you put in your company code and hit enter, and boom, your purchase order number appears. Later on in the exercises, I will tell you, put your purchase order number in there. And it will be up to you to figure out, oh, I need to search for it. Oh, and here's the best way for me to find it among the tabs that I am provided. And when you're searching with dialog boxes like this, some of the things you're going to see, it would not be unusual for there to be 15 tabs representing 15 different ways to search for things, and the default one is not the one that will actually work for you. So you have to think about, I'm looking for a purchase order, what do I know? Well, I know my company code, so I'm going to search for purchase orders based on company code. You could also search for purchase orders based on asset categories. You can search for purchase orders based on a myriad of different things. But if you ask yourself, okay, what do I know that I can use as the basis for my search, you can narrow this down and do this very, very efficiently. So there's an expectation that you're going to be accumulating knowledge that you can apply in later exercises. Questions so far? Have any of you done any of the lab work yet? Just curious. I'm not expecting that. So a couple of people have. What you are going to see, and let me shell out of this and explain this for everyone's benefit, is there are sets of instructions such as, and I think I showed you this last time, define a company code, where this lab sequence takes up, I think, just 1 or 2 sheets in the lab book here and is very, very short work to be done. When you, on the other hand, start creating your hierarchy of cost centers, you're going to see about 3 or 4 pages of instructions that tell you how to create the first cost center. And then, and you want to be real careful to read your lab exercise, because at the end of that lab, it says, now that you have done that for this cost center, go to Appendix A and create it for all of the other cost centers, okay? Now, creating a cost center probably takes about 5 minutes. Every line in this spreadsheet is a different cost center or cost center group. So the exercise where you're doing this, that one exercise will probably take you about an hour's work, okay? So as you are working through your lab work, realize that some of the sequences are going to literally take a few seconds, whereas some of the exercises will take a much more extended period of time. The reason why I have broken up the lab work as I have is to try and give you a reasonable chunk of lab work to do as a deliverable for the class. But I do not really encourage you to sit down and say, I'm going to do my lab work for this class and turn it into like Mission Impossible, where I'm going to work on this for the next 8 hours and get as much done as I possibly can and try and work weeks and weeks ahead. You will wind up wanting to beat your head against the wall, okay? My recommendation to you is to think in terms of, all right, I'm going to work on this for an hour on Monday afternoon, and then I'll come back and work on it for 45 minutes on Tuesday morning. And if you break it up in that fashion, always keeping track of where you leave off every time, you're going to find it not to be burdensome or frustrating, and you're going to be a lot less likely to make mistakes. Where students wind up making mistakes is when they get behind and say, okay, I'm just going to do a marathon session this Saturday and work on all this till I'm done. And they wind up trying to work on this for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. That will make your life very miserable, and you will make mistakes because you stop reading things very carefully. So my encouragement to you is to break things up. And if you sit down one afternoon and all you do is the one exercise where you create this hierarchy, or even if you do half of the exercise where you create half of the hierarchy and come back and do the rest of it later, you're going to be likely much more successful. Okay? So I've tried to break the work up in a way that makes it conducive for you to do that, but it's going to be up to you to actually manage your time and make that work for you. Do you have any questions related to the lab work or really any of the other things that we have talked about to this point? Yes, ma'am. You should be ready for a quiz every class period, but no, we will not have a quiz every class period. What will happen in this class once we get rolling, so let's assume it's going to take us another week or so to really start getting into the nitty-gritty of things. It's a lot of stuff to keep track of that can be pretty terminology driven. So some classes will come in and I'll have a slide deck with 25 questions on it, and we'll go around the room person to person with everybody answering a question as kind of a review session. Sometimes that won't be that, it will be a quiz, okay? It just kind of depends on what kind of time we have and so on. But the nature of this class is, if you don't stay on top of the terms and the concepts as we go along, you will be sunk. And not you precisely, but collectively you. Where this really gets hard for some students is when we start doing some of the things that I referenced previously, which is the financial accounting implications of certain activities in the ERP system. You know, when this happens, this account is debited, this account is credited. Every year, there are students that if they had gotten all of those questions right, would have an A on the final exam, but because they missed most of them, they got a C minus, okay? There's a lot of complexity there. But the great thing is, if you stay on top of that as we go along, then it actually is really, really easy. And what I tend to see is some students either get all of those right, and it was the easiest part of the test for them, and then some students get all of them wrong, and it's their big problem. So for that reason, we're going to do a lot of conceptual review as the semester goes along. So some of it will be in the form of quizzes, some of it will just be in the form of things that we do together. Okay? Good question. Other questions? Yes.
Something
No, I run Windows 10 on all of my machines and it works just great. The only issue I've ever seen in the last 6 months is there was a version of the SAP GUI that when you tried to install it gave installation problems because of a missing C++ runtime library. And the newest version of the SAP GUI installer, which is what I have out on the web now, solved that problem for us. But that's the only thing that's been a situation in the last several months. And I run it on Windows 10 without any problem at all. So even though the documentation might not specifically reference Windows 10, just ignore that. Okay. Other questions? All right, let's see what I had on the next couple slides here by the way of helpful advice. Playing detective and tracing through where there is an error in configuration is among the most frustrating yet most educational experiences in working with ERP. It really is. I mean, if I say this, don't think I'm encouraging you to fill my inbox with problems. But when students send me errors that they're having, it's kind of fun to try and figure them out. And you'll kind of know maybe whether or not you're cut out for a career in this field as to your attitude. You know, if your attitude is, I got an error message, stupid computer, and you want to spike it on the ground, maybe this isn't a career for you to pursue, okay? Find something else. But if you can kind of train yourself to think of, oh, this is a mystery for me to solve, I get to play Sherlock Holmes, then that's a good mindset. When problems occur, take screenshots of the error message, of the data entry screens. I want you to solve your own problems, but if you've gone through the prior steps and are still stuck, email me and provide details of the problem, screenshots and particular information is key. Sometimes I will collect errors from students and bring them in and show the class. Not as a way of saying, ha, 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 Johnny had this error occur, let's all laugh at how stupid Johnny is, but as a way of saying, okay, some of you didn't experience this, but here's a problem one of your classmates ran into. Let's look at it and let's see how the problem was solved. So even along those lines, if you run into a problem on your own and you take screenshots and stuff and then later you solve the problem on your own, email that to me and I may share that with the class as well so that they get the benefit of what it is that you ran into. So my last thoughts here in closing out our introduction is you will have reading from your textbook, questions from the textbook. You had homework due today along those lines. You have the lab work. That plus the tests and quizzes are your main deliverables for this class. Stay on top of them. Study frequently. Now, I don't know if any of you are the kind of student that does this, but over the years, I have occasionally had students that will go to the length of creating little flashcards, little 3x5 flashcards. And in fact, if you Google the name of this class, you will find a few places online where some students have created online electronic flashcards. The really funny thing about that is some of the students that did that became tired of their fellow students freeloading off of their work and deleted a lot of it. So some of it you have like really good stuff for the first couple chapters and then you're like abandoned. There's not any stuff for the later chapters. But I will say the students that go to the effort to make the little flashcards and study from them, I can usually say, okay, there's the A students in the class. Okay? Not every A student has had to go to that length, but if you're the kind of student that benefits from that, that will really be of help to you in this class because terminology is the key. Now, let me reference this in terms of your homework, okay? There may be a homework question, hypothetically, that says, what is a company code? Now, a company code has an extremely precise definition with several key characteristics. When I grade your homework, I am looking for those key characteristics. And the main reason I am doing that is because if you see questions on an exam in the future about a company code, I want you to have been able to use your homework as a study resource. If you give me a perfectly fine answer, but it leaves out one of the key facts related to what a company code is, then you'll probably get, a score on this of, 4 out of 5 or 3.5 out of 5 or whatever have you. So as you are doing your homework, not so much with this first homework you did, but with homeworks that are upcoming, be aware that you're going to see questions about key things that are going to be very, very important. I want to make sure you understand, I do not mind answers to questions that are in the form of what is a company code, where your answer is a quotation. But what I do require is if it's a quotation, you put quotation marks around it and cite it. I will also warn you that your book, although it's a great resource, makes no effort at brevity, okay? And so, whereas you could answer this question in 20 words, your book is going to use 350, okay? Please don't give me the 350-word answer on your homework. Boil it down to what the important parts are. But it is perfectly fine for you to quote your book or other sources in answering questions, because often the best answers are going to come from other sources. You will perhaps have to Google this, but there is a website out there run by SAP called the SAP Glossary. And if you want to know what a company code is, the answer in the SAP Glossary is pretty much going to be a really, really super answer, because it's the official SAP answer to that question. So don't be afraid to use resources like that. Don't be afraid to copy from the SAP Glossary. Just make sure you put quotes around it and cite that it came from the SAP Glossary. I don't care about, APA format or anything like that. Just put quotes and then in parentheses after put, SAP Glossary or something like that, so you're acknowledging where you got it from. I really do encourage you to think about, I've had classes do this from semester to semester. Everybody gets here a little bit early and they kind of quiz each other. And I've found over the years that, ironically, I'll come to class with 10 questions on my quiz, and in the students quizzing each other before class, they had 7 of the 10 that they went over as a class. And so as a result, pretty much everybody got them right. You might want to think about that, but that's totally, at your discretion. You're probably not going to get any benefit from trying to communally work with your classmates and doing the lab work. That's just probably going to be really frustrating for you. And certainly you should do your own written homework, but getting ready for quizzes and exams communally is really, really useful. The points in this class are heavily weighted towards our exams, okay? So what you should be thinking of is all the homework that you do, all the lab work that you do is getting you ready to do well on the exam. And so that is the way points are allocated here. There is an SAP training course called, and they give all of their training courses a code, almost like a course number. TERP 10 is Technical ERP Class 10. This class parallels a lot of the TERP 10 content. And so the things that we will be doing are on that basis. I do have the TERP 10 certification, and I'm actually a TERP 10 trainer. And some of the questions I will be using in our review sessions and on the exam are official SAP questions that show up on their TERP 10 exam. You should all be glad that SAP does not write your exams for your classes that you are taking here in your coursework at ETSU. Because whoever writes SAP questions is evil, okay? And let me explain why. A typical SAP question would be something like, which of the following is a characteristic of a company code? And then they'll list 8 things, and then they will say, select all that apply. And you have to look at that list of 8 and say, yes, check. No, uncheck. Yes, check. And answer this question. And on an SAP test, if any of those are wrong, you got this question wrong. You have to get a perfect response. So they love what they call multiple select questions. And to further make your life miserable, a multiple select question may only have one answer. So the fact that they told you to pick all of the ones that were right doesn't mean that there's more than one. Their tests are really annoying. And they do that on purpose. There are certification tests out there that most of the people that take the test pass and earn the certification. I won't name companies, but there are some companies out there that literally they have certification exams where you could go out to the web, you could buy like a study guide for such and such a test, study it for 2 weeks, take the test and pass it. SAP does not want that to happen. SAP is really happy that the pass rate for their tests run around 30% because they want their certifications to actually be meaningful. And because some tests don't get updated that much, a lot of people over time, you could go out on the web and Google certain tests and find where people pretty much have compiled all of the questions you're going to see. They rewrite their tests quarterly to avoid that happening. So they take this really, really, really seriously, which is good. So having said that, if you take this class, well, you are taking this class. If you take this class and do well, what you might want to think about in the future is taking the TERP 10 class. And I can share more information with you about this later on. With this class being in the fall, it's not as ideal. But during the summer, a lot of universities offer what they call a TERP 10 boot camp, where you go to that university, you stay in their residence halls, you take a 2-week kind of review of everything that we do in this class, and then you take this test. And a lot of universities that are doing this run pass rates of 90 to 100%. And the cost of this is actually pretty reasonable. If you went to work for a company and they sent you to an official SAP TERP 10 training class, just as a rough estimate, that would probably be about a $10,000 investment. For universities, this is less than $1,000. Okay, so it is kind of an interesting opportunity. Having said that, as I have talked to the companies in this region that have an interest in hiring students that know about configuration, what they have said is, tell your students they don't need this. Tell them that if they take this class and they know that material, that we really don't see a lot of value in the TERP 10. We'd rather hire them and send them to other training classes that would expand their skills in different areas. But that is a lot of what the content in your textbook and what the things that we'll talk about this semester are patterned after. So that's why I say this is a very marketable skill that you are picking up. Questions? Yes, ma'am. Nope, you just have to do well in those courses. Other questions? All right, so let's get into our first discussion, which some of the things in the first discussion here, if you have taken the CSCI 3720 course, which not all of you have, some of this would be a bit of a review for you, but some of it is new. And of course, for some of you, all of this is new. But our discussion will parallel the chapter 1 in your textbook that you read, and so we'll kind of use that as a jumping off point. We are going to spend a lot of time this semester talking in detail about business processes. So let me just start by asking you, oh, I'm drawing with my finger and blue ink on the screen. That wasn't what I intended, but nonetheless. So question 1 is, what is a business process? Okay, so who can give me either an entire definition or something that is notable / important about a business process? What do you think? Yes, sir. Okay, so tasks / activities that produce desired outcome. And I particularly like one facet of what you said, in that in CSCI 3720, there is a homework assignment that I give the students historically about 2/3 of the way through the semester, where this is a question that is in the homework. And 75% of the students will go to their textbook that we use for that class and find what I consider to be a very poor definition, and they will write an answer that says a business process is the stuff that we do to produce products. That's an overly specific definition. The stuff that we do to produce products is a business process, but so are the tasks or activities that we do to hire a new employee, or the tasks and activities that we do to create a new product. There's a whole bunch of things that we do in our organization to produce desired outcomes. And so I particularly like your definition here where you say tasks or activities that we do to produce a desired outcome. What are other key things to keep in mind as we're kind of building up the elements of a business process? What else is important here in terms of a business process? 2 things are mentioned in what's been said. Tasks or activities, that's good, and desired outcome. What else is a part of this? What's that? Triggered by an event. Thank you. And the word that you used at the beginning of that is exactly the right word. Business processes have triggers. Okay? Triggers, which is a trigger tells us to start a process. So if we're going to put this together, a business process is something that is triggered in our organization that causes us to engage in tasks or activities that produce a desired outcome. Okay? This is good. As a matter of fact, we have 3 of what I would consider to be the 4 essential things here. One of them, the one that we're missing, is perhaps implied. Okay? So let me spot you that. Or what does, you had something to add?
I don't know if it'd be like redundant, like the steps involved for business process.
Okay, and that is, we're missing a word that, once again, you probably are implying it, but it is a specific sequence of steps. If you think about it, there could be 10 steps that we do to hire an employee. The point of a business process is to say, all right, we do step 1, then we do step 2, and then we can do steps 3, 4, and 5 in parallel at the same time. And then when they're done, we do step 6 and step 7 and so on. So it's not just that we have tasks and activities that produce an outcome. We have tasks and activities that are triggered that will cause us to engage in a specific sequence of events. Now, let me ask you a much more advanced question. which is, let's talk about these triggers for a second. The metaphor here is pretty obvious. We're talking about like the firing of a gun. And when you pull a trigger, let's say the starter's pistol, just like it tells the racers to begin running, pulling a trigger in our enterprise information system is going to cause us to execute this business process. Here's my question for you. What form do most of these triggers take in our organization? Creation of a document. Very good. You know, it's not like the HR manager walks into the office one day and fires a starter's pistol and says, let's hire a new employee. That would be rather detrimental to workplace safety, okay? So instead what happens is somebody might create a document called a request to hire, and when that document is created and approved, now we trigger that process. So most business processes are triggered by a document being created. How do we know we need to buy something? Somebody creates a purchase requisition. How do we know we need to hire someone? Someone creates a request to hire document. And how do we know we need to ship an order out to a customer? Somebody creates a sales order document. But for the most part, if we're going to play enterprise information system, what we do is we're sitting there waiting for people to create documents. And as documents are created, we look at that document and say, oh, we need to do this. Oh, we need to do this. And so there's a giant brain, if you will, in our enterprise information system that's continually looking for new documents that are created and responding appropriately. There's one other element that goes with the business process here. Tasks, activities, triggers, sequence of steps. What's the one piece that's missing? Coordination among, which we call functional areas. Functional area responsibilities, we'll just say at this point. I have a business process. It consists of 17 steps in this sequence. I know to start that sequence when this document is created, and I know the sequence in which those steps will be created or executed. If that is all I know, I still have a problem, because who's going to actually do what? So our business process defines what functional areas are responsible. To give you an example, we're going through this right now. When departments here at the university want their employees to get paid, which is somewhat important to those employees, okay? There's a contract. The contract gets created in the department, typically by the executive aide. It then gets approved by the department chair. It then gets approved by the dean. It then goes to the vice president. It then goes to payroll. It then goes to HR. And by the time it's made all of its stops, it's gone through about a dozen different departments on campus that all do what they have to do to make sure that the person is getting paid the right amount, the right person going into the right account, and so on. But all of that is well defined as a part of the business process. What makes this so challenging is this is typically going to cut across many different functional areas. So this is why we will often see the term here, cross-functional. Cross-functional just means that multiple functional areas are going to have to collaborate in the execution of most business processes. This is a great definition, but I'm going to add just a couple of things to it, which is a business process carries with it, I'll just write over here to the side, carries with it a flow of information. So step one might gather a particular piece of information which it passes on to step 2. Step 2 then adds to that, passes that bundle of information to step 3. Step 3 then does its thing and adds to the information, and we continue in that fashion. These information bundles that are passed along, what would be a more precise term for these information bundles? What would be the precise term I'm looking for? Document. For those of listening in by way of audio, everyone in the class just shouted document with great vigor here because they knew that was the answer to my question. Okay? Documents are at the heart of this. We're not only having a document being created to trigger the process, but all throughout the execution of the process, documents are being updated and other documents are being generated. Information flows within a business process within a set of related documents. So if you want to know where we are in a business process, look at the document flow and look at the information in the documents, and it will tell you basically a play-by-play of how things work. Let me give you an example that relates to something we'll talk about in greater depth. We are planning to manufacture something in our facility. And this is not something like making a skateboard or a bicycle. This is something like constructing a football stadium or building a jumbo jet that is going to take an extended period of time. Well, the ultimate cost of that jumbo jet might be, let's just say, $55 million. Okay? Do I have to have $55 million in hand on day one if I know that it's actually going to take me 12 months to build this jumbo jet? I don't. I know that the jumbo jet is going to cost me $55 million, but that $55 million is going to be spread out over a 12-month period. Now, what will happen over time is costs will be accumulated. And if you could just imagine one document, it's actually a set of documents, but if you could imagine one document that as money is spent and as expenses are incurred, they get added to the running total with the expectation that by the time I get to the end of 12 months, I will have a jumbo jet and I will have spent $55 million in so doing. But it's not like I cut a check for $55 million on day one and that's it. This is a whole stream of expenses that are going to happen over an extended period of time. So that's the idea here. We know at one point in the process what the ultimate total will be, but there's going to be a lot of accounting along the way to make sure that we're on budget and things are happening the way they are supposed to. That's what a business process does for us. It helps us manage the flow of information, and it also, as a byproduct, helps us manage flows of money that might be associated with processes as well. Yes, sir. There's a lot of things in what you said that I want to take apart and respond to. First of all, an organization should have their business processes streamlined. Not all do. And in fact, a lot of organizations would benefit from having someone or someones really take a hard look at their business process and help them. Unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, things happen in an ad hoc fashion. Let me give you a silly example. Many, many, many years ago, I used to work in the restaurant industry. And one of the things that our restaurant did is we served iced tea to customers. Depending upon who made the iced tea any given day, it was either too sweet or not sweet enough. It was highly variable because all of the employees had their own distinct way of making iced tea. We should have had a standard way of making iced tea, but we didn't. I wasn't in charge. I had no influence over that. And so that was just the way it happened. A lot of organizations are like that about things a whole lot more important than making iced tea. So first of all, should it be standardized and should it be streamlined? Absolutely. In a lot of cases, it's not. The other challenge here is things change. If I'm going to stick with my iced tea example, we buy new equipment, we get new water filtration systems, we switch the brand of tea bags we're buying, and so on an ongoing basis, things change, which means that we should be updating our business processes accordingly. But what tends to happen is many times organizations just focus on the really important business processes, and some of the other ones tend to not get a lot of attention. The other thing that you mentioned, I think, was, we'll have some business processes that get executed very, very rarely. For example, in financial accounting, year end occurs just once a year. It carries with it a lot of work, but it's not like that's happening on a daily basis. That just happens once a year. Maybe we are audited once every multiples of years. And when we're audited, there are a number of things that we have to do. So some of these business processes may get triggered extremely sporadically. If you will, sometimes we might have a business process that is so sporadic, we would benefit from practicing it almost like a fire drill. You hope that your building never catches on fire. But if it does, you also hope that you have a process for getting everybody out of that building expeditiously. So you might want to practice a fire drill even when there's not a fire. So you could think of some business processes having that dimension to it as well. Okay. Great question. Did I answer all the different parts of it? Okay. Other questions? All right. Next question I have for you. You had a question on your homework that kind of alluded to this. So that may create some background for you in your thinking. How does having a process-oriented view of business differ from having a functional view of business? Well, before we answer that question, let's take that apart for a second here. What do I mean when I say we have a functional view of business? Businesses are broken up into functional areas. We have people that work in accounting. We have people that work in finance. We have people that work in the plant making things. We have secretarial support. We could go through and break our organization up into many different functional areas. And in fact, some of these areas have subdivisions. Like accounting would typically be broken up into, we have accounts payable and we have accounts receivable, and perhaps other subdivisions as well. Finance could be similarly subdivided. So depending upon the size of our organization, we might have a lot of these different functional areas. So when I say we have a functional view of business, we look at our business as being a collection of these functional areas, and we place our focus on maybe the one functional area that we're in charge of. I'm in charge of the plant, so all I care about is the plant and my plant employees and what we do in the plant. That would be a very functional view of a business. I work in accounts receivable. All I care about is accounts receivable and the facets of my job. That can create a very dysfunctional organization. A process-oriented view means that instead of thinking of our company as a collection of different functional areas, we think in terms of all of our business processes we have and how the different functional areas collaborate. So I'm going to kind of spot you the answer to this question. One of these, if you will, views an organization as a very collaborative effort, where the other views an organization, if you will, as a very segregated effort. so, let me toss one part of this to you. What does it matter? Absolutely. I work in accounts receivable. All I care about is accounts receivable. And so if the plant starts having problems and we stop selling as many products, that's actually good for me because now I don't have to bill as many customers. My job just got easier. Now, of course, in 6 months I might be out of a job, but if all I care about is what happens in my department, I don't really worry about the rest of the organization. It's extremely short-sighted. It's extremely unrealistic. And while an accounts receivable clerk might get away with only caring about accounts receivable, the manager of accounts receivable should care about the rest of his or her organization. And so one of the things that is key to leadership roles in an organization is that you don't just pigeonhole yourself in one area. And you will grow in your career and the opportunities available to you in your career if you will not have a functional view. By the way, there is a very relevant application of this for every one of you in this room. I would encourage you not to think of yourself as an IT major or an accounting major or a finance major or putting yourself in a little pigeonhole, putting yourself in a box. What companies more and more want to hire is people that can operate in a cross-functional environment. You may be a finance person, but you're going to be talking to people in accounting. You may need to visit the plant periodically to find out what's going on there. You may need to talk to the IT professionals in your organization. To the extent you view your job as not just being in the finance box, but being someone who can take on a variety of tasks that all have something to do with finance, clearly, but perform more of a connective and broad role in an organization, you will be much more valued. Computing people. The era of when computing people only interact with other computing people in their job is very rapidly going away. As I talk to a lot of companies, one of the big things a lot of companies are really thinking about now is instead of thinking in terms of IT being, let's say, 2 floors in this particular building where a couple hundred people work together, maybe we should be distributed throughout the organization. And maybe we should have IT professionals who have offices in the plant and have offices in the accounting department and have offices in the finance department so that they can be more available to collaborate with the professionals in these different areas. To the extent you are not only willing but eager and interested in working in that environment, you will have career opportunities open for you that will not be available to your counterparts. And you will be promoted, and your pay will be reflected of that, and you'll be able to take on more and more responsibilities over time. So there's a real implication for this in you. Don't put yourself in too small of a box. Think of yourself in the broader picture of the overall value you can add to your organization. Now, having said that, if you're an accounting major, learn everything you can about accounting. If you're an IT major, learn everything you can about IT because you're still going to need those skills, but you're going to have to know how to apply those skills in a variety of contexts. And that kind of gives us a nice transition into what was my next question here, which was, what is the silo effect? And the silo effect is when an employee gets fixated, if you will, on the particulars of their job and misses the bigger picture. And I started this with the word employee, but this could also be department or team or other grouping of employees. See, if my job is to make widgets, then clearly I should be really good at making widgets and to try and get better at making widgets all the time. But if the only thing my brain ever does is thinking about making widgets, I'm really not making a maximum contribution to my organization. Because maybe I could help my organization figure out a new type of widget that would revolutionize the market. Or maybe there are things going on in the manufacture of widgets that if I pass this information on to the people doing purchasing, they could buy me better components that would help me more easily and cheaper make a better widget. The silo effect is caused by someone who just kind of puts themselves in a silo in a box and is isolated from the rest of the organization. Now there's another way that the silo effect plays out, and the silo effect also plays out in terms of information management. If I view my role as making widgets, and I therefore accumulate in my brain a vast storehouse of widget-making information that never gets shared anywhere else in the organization, then I'm robbing my organization of the value of my expertise. If you will, the best organizations have the attitude that information is meant to be shared for our common good. Poor organizations have the attitude information is meant to be hoarded so that I have power. And you will see large organizations out there even today that wrestle with this. What most contemporary organizations are looking to do is they're looking at, okay, we have information. Information comes into us from a variety of different sources, both internal and external, but we are an information gathering vacuum. Well, how do we leverage that information to make our company better? How do we make sure that if something is happening over here in Plant 1 that represents a revolutionary new way for us to make products, how do we make sure that that information makes its way to Plant 2 and Plant 3 and Plant so on? You see, if the manager of Plant 1 is a bit of a jerk and only cares about Plant 1 and their productivity levels, and he knows that every 6 months there's a big contest to see who has the most productive plant, and he's figured out a way to make his plant run at 85% efficiency due to some little new scheduling technique he's developed, and he knows that that's going to enable him to outcompete Plant 2 and Plant 3. If he's a jerk and only cares about his plant, he's going to hoard that information so that his employees get their benefits or get their bonuses. But that's counterproductive to the organization. We want that information to be readily shared so that all of our plants are more efficient, which means the company as a whole makes more money, which means everybody gets raises because we're now more profitable than they were before. See, if we're following this silo mindset, we only care about ourselves, we only care about our team, we only care about what we know now, we've got to get rid of that. And we've got to figure out how to break down these silos and share information. Now, I do consulting work for companies in this region. Do you want to know what I spend a lot of time talking to those companies about? Exactly what I've been talking to you about for the last 10 minutes. Because they recognize this, but then the question is, how do we solve this? Part of it's a technology problem. And I would say that in looking at some of your answers and your homework to this, some of you made statements like, oh, we can solve the silo effect by installing an enterprise information system. If only it were that easy, okay? It's not. This is a cultural issue. This is a human issue. This is a problem that really requires efforts in a variety of different domains. But I am telling you that there are companies in this region and out of this region that are big companies that they still struggle with this because they don't have effective information sharing in their organization, and it is extremely bad. Now, here's the wonderful thing about capitalism. If they continue to be bad at it, they will be out of business, okay? Because a competitor will pop up that is not bad at it and will reap the benefits that they will not reap and will drive them out of business, which is very sad for the people that work for that organization. If you think about it, they're really shooting themselves in the foot, but it's what happens, and it happens every day and every year in businesses in this region and beyond. Last thing, what is meant by the term enterprise system? Well, let's talk about two different things here. An enterprise system or an enterprise information system. Either of those two terms, which I'll abbreviate either EIS or ES. This is a computer-based system for sharing and using business information. Based on that definition, could Excel be viewed as an enterprise information system? Sure. It's not super powerful. It does what it does quite fine, but it would loosely fall into that definition. What is an enterprise resource planning system? If you will, if we were drawing a Venn diagram, this would be enterprise information systems, and this would be ERP systems. It is a type of enterprise information system. What ERP systems are focused on is end-to-end execution of business processes. Now, what do I mean when I say end-to-end execution? I mean that we throw a particular business process at it, the fulfillment process. And it takes that process from its earliest stage to its last stage. Every step of that business process is embedded in that singular computer system. That's what an enterprise resource planning system is. It is a system that allows end-to-end complete execution of a business process. Now, some ERP systems, such as SAP ERP, could execute thousands of different kinds of business processes. Some ERP systems are very narrowly focused. They might just be focused on, for example, human resources. But they can execute end-to-end every step in the employee hiring, the employee benefits, the employee termination process. But what makes an ERP system distinct from a generic enterprise information system is enterprise information systems just focus on sharing information. So it could just be involved in a subset of the steps in a business process. ERP, we go back to our definition of a business process, and we say an ERP system lets us execute all of the steps of that process with a consistent document flow for the sake of trying to optimize and make that more efficient for us. This is where we are out of time, so we will call our session today to a close. Have a great afternoon, everyone. If you did not get a chance to sign in, the sign-in sheet here is the front, so please make sure you grab that. Have a good day.